More on macOS and iOS convergence, and who really is using Apple TV Plus and Apple Music. This is MacVoices. Today's MacVoices is supported by MacVoices After Dark. Uncensored, off-topic, and always off the wall. MacVoices After Dark is available as a benefit to our Patreon subscribers. Sign up at patreon.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. The MacVoices Live panel continues our discussion of whether iOS and macOS are converging, and if it really is causing confusion. Then, are there really age categories for who's using Apple TV Plus and Apple Music? Let's go back and let the panel do the talking. Mark, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think Ben, I think you were just about to step to the comment that remember way back when the iPhone was first introduced, and then a couple years after that, the iPad was introduced. There seemed to be these waves of commentary that Apple is so clever. These people are already trained on how to use these devices because they know what Safari is and they know how to use Safari on the Mac, or they know how to use Mail on the Mac. So like you're saying, the size of the user bases has completely flip-flopped. But again, I think again, this is part of just blending the environments to have a sort of a seamless experience. All the continuity features that we've talked about, various times here on the show. Not only that, but also just the visual experience, and I think that is clearly in Apple's interest. And I wish this author, has a little bit more intellectual curiosity and digs into something a little bit more detail instead of just writing a screed about not liking the fact that icons on Mac look like icons on iOS devices.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, guys. I mean, I get so confused whenever I see an icon that I can't remember which device I'm on.
Really?
He's kidding.
Yes, I'm kidding. I mean, if it's a mail,
you got me. Okay,
you were really pulling a straight face there.
Chuck, you did that so great. I actually started to talk before I realized what was happening, and at least I had the sense to shut up.
Yeah. Well, if you see a Safari icon, I'm not confused as to which device I'm on. And I think Mark started out with it, that, it makes sense almost. In fact, it really makes a lot of sense to have the icon look similar if they're Apple apps, so that you know which one you're in, and you're even if you're not on the device you're not familiar with, you know what you'd be opening. Jim, you wanted in after I pulled out the wool over everybody's eyes.
I think, this is kind of to Jeff's point that this person is maybe a new Mac user. I don't think this person, really understands what the Mac is. Maybe it might as well be iOS as far as she's concerned. I mean, the Mac has real windowing. It has real multitasking. It has virtual memory. It's extensible. You can do things like route audio. You can run non-sandboxed apps, and on and on and on. The Mac is not iOS. And sure, it is sharing more things like user interface and code, flat out, which is, for the most part, it's good for users because of consistency, because there are a lot of users that use both platforms. But it's also really good for Apple. They don't want to, spend the development time of writing things twice. They don't, they don't want to write a Mac version and a Windows version. Not a Windows version, an iOS version. They definitely don't want to write a Windows version. Although, it was nice when Safari was on Windows. But, remember we had for a long time messages on the Mac was not keeping up with messages on iOS. And, now they've unified the code base. So it's the same code. And so they work the same. And notice now I think it's pretty cool that there are so many things that, here we got this new feature. It's on the Mac. It's on iPadOS. It's on iOS. Just across the board. Where there in the past there was often delays. Where things would take years to go from one platform to the other, or maybe never. Now that's happening less and less and less, which is because they are unifying a lot of things underneath, and adding the ability to run iOS code on the Mac. So I think it's great, and I'm not even sure why we're giving this author any attention, but since we did, I thought I'd throw in.
It's summer. It's slow news time.
Yeah, that's
we
what I
can
was going
find
to say.
something.
Yeah, but I think there is. Well, I'll talk about that in a second. But Brian, I know you had a comment you wanted to put in.
Just a quick thought. I was thinking about, obviously this article's about Apple and the different ways that the Mac operating system might be looking more and more like the iOS. But if we look at other companies that also have ecosystems, they tend to do the same type of thing too. Mm-hmm. If we look at Microsoft, jump back to 2013, I think, when those what they call those Metro Tile things were really popular, and if you jumped over to the original release of the Xbox One game console, being a Microsoft product, it used that same type of look, and if it didn't, people would be upset, And so I think you see in other ecosystems the same type of thing. It doesn't take away anything from the internal, what that device is and does and what it's supposed to do. But if you paint over the graphical user interface of it, that's perfectly fine. And it should look similar. So people feel comfortable going back and forth between the systems.
I mean, there are places they could do it in ways where it would be a detriment. I don't think they have, at least not much. The settings app might be one place where I think it is a detriment. If they started doing things like, making all the buttons bigger and putting bigger space around, using a less dense interface on the Mac, because on iOS devices, they have to be touch friendly so that, they're going to be bigger and have more space around them for fingers instead of a pointing device. If they start doing that on macOS, and especially if they do it on macOS and don't add touch interface to it, that would be concerning. But they haven't done too much of that. So we need to keep them honest, and we don't want them to be all identical, because they are different. The Mac is an indirect pointer, and there's definitely advantages to that. And one of them is the ability to do denser interfaces. But I think for the most part, they're doing a pretty good job of that. Remember, they had that slide a few years ago where, are we going to merge them? No. And that slide was like maybe, a little disingenuous, but, I think they're doing a good job of doing it appropriately, and not dumbing down. I think that's the thing. A lot of people are worried that Apple would dumb down the Mac and maybe remove capabilities. Like if they ever remove the ability to run non-sandboxed apps or non-app store apps on the Mac, well, that would be a huge alarm if they did that. But so far, they're not doing that. So they're not taking away the things that make the Mac unique and powerful. So that would be my line in the sand.
But they're just along that line, Jim, they're making it harder. Some things you just can't download a binary. You actually have to use something, and maybe this is going down a rat hole, but you have to use, one of the package managers like Brew or something like that, to compile it on your own Mac, and then go through, setting it up and configure it in order to, run some stuff. But
what package manager? Like what? I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, Homebrew. Don't you know Homebrew?
Yeah, you don't need, you don't need Homebrew. Homebrew's a convenience.
No, there are programs I've run that if you download a binary from the site, they will not run because it says it's from an unidentified developer. And even if you go through all the the hooks through going through,
all you have to do is right click on it.
Let's take this offline. Let's take this offline. My experience is they're making it tougher and tougher and harder. But I agree
a little bit. It's concerning, but the line would a line would be, oh, you can't run apps outside of the App Store.
I agree. I think
iOS.
Yeah, I think we're saying similar things, and also a lot of the other tools that they're making it such that you have to download and compile it locally. There is no way just to because I've been through this of just trying, because it used to be you could say, okay, this is from an unidentified developer. No, do you want to run it? Fine. So some tools out there are not from somebody who's in there as an Apple key or whatever they're called.
You can still do that. You have to right click on it and choose open, and then it will come up with the dialog that says, do you want to run it? If you double click on it, it won't let you do that.
I'll contact you if and when next time I have this problem, because I've been through this, and the only way I found to do it was search around and say, okay, yeah, Apple's tightened things up. Use Homebrew and just install it that way. And I did that, and it worked just fine. And I've had this at least on 2 different tools that I use. So.
But Mark, don't you think some of this is related to the fact that we're back to the conversation about we are not the target audience anymore? That Apple's trying to protect the common user from clicking on things and opening things they shouldn't be allowed to. And so for us, it's an inconvenience, but for them, it's a protection.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, I don't think an average user is going to go in and, go into the special securities tab and go in and set that, and then, have to reboot your Mac and then run the thing. I could be wrong, but I just don't think, a lot of, average users would go through that many hoops, in order to.
Are you installing command line tools?
Yes.
Okay. Well, when you're doing command line tools, you're talking about doing something totally different. Now we're out of the average Mac user demographic. Now we're into us propeller heads. Yeah. And having to do command line stuff and using utilities like Homebrew that actually just makes it easier. That's okay. I have no problem with that. If you are having to use Homebrew to install just regular native Mac apps, not something that's running in terminal, and Homebrew was the only way to do it. Now I'd say we have a problem.
Yeah, that would be a huge problem.
Yeah.
Webb, I couldn't tell if you were just moving your arm, or if you had something to say.
I've used the terminal maybe a dozen times in my career. I'm probably more that average unsophisticated or semi-sophisticated Mac user. So I'm just going for the ride on this one. It's I've never had to do this. I have gotten into the privacy settings and said, yeah, I know I want to do this app for whatever, and grant those permissions that way. But I'm just going for the ride on this one, Chuck.
Okay.
I think one simple tool is rsync, which Apple has a pitifully antiquated version. The recent version has is really a lot of great updates and features. And it used to be you just download a build for Mac, but now the app has to be signed by a developer, and it's open source software. There is no developer. In the past, they would let you say, okay, are you sure you're really going to use this thing? Yes. Now they've upped it and said, no, unless even they have the credentials from somebody who's registered as a developer, they won't let you download a binary and run it. You have to build it on your own. And yeah, I think we're down. I think we're in the 0.01% of we're in the basis points of users. But
You could also just remove the quarantine bit, but that's the way command line tools are distributed. The same thing happens on Linux. That's the way they're distributed on Linux. You use apt-get, which is the Linux version of Homebrew. On Unix, that stuff is distributed in source clone. That's the way.
No. I mean, in Linux, they're distributed two ways. I mean, there are distributions we can download binaries, and there are others we have to download and go through a compilation and making step. So I guess the trend seems to be, unless you have more and more skills where you can actually do this, Apple is making it less convenient and more work for their users to casually download and run something.
If you're doing something from the command line, you're not casually downloading. I know I'm being totally pedantic on you here.
Okay, that's fine. I appreciate it, Jeff.
And you know what? I totally get the frustration you're having, but at the same time, I think that's why we have Homebrew and installing Homebrew so you can do all this stuff. That was exactly the right thing to do, and it makes your life so much easier. And it doesn't matter how steeped in command line we are. Any of us that's doing anything with command line where you're installing something, the first thing you do is you install Homebrew, and then you do everything else after that. So awesome, Homebrew.
But again, I think
the bottom line is iOS.
I was just going to say, this goes to Jim's point that this is the power and capabilities that a Mac has, that iOS devices do not have, and I don't think for the foreseeable future will ever have. And that's the difference between the two type of devices, fundamentally.
I was going to clarify that iOS will only run code that's signed by Apple. If it's not signed by Apple, it won't run on iOS. That's not the case on Mac. So you cannot run Homebrew on iOS. It's not allowed. There's no way except going through Apple. So that's basically the difference. Is you can't on iOS you cannot run any code that hasn't been blessed by Apple. On Mac you still can.
Jim, I hate to take us too far on a tangent, so I'll try to bring us back quick. But if on iOS, if it has to be signed by Apple, is that how some of the white label apps and some of the things that get side loaded in that are industry or even company specific, are they still registered with Apple and therefore that those apps are signed?
Are you talking about the enterprise?
Yeah,
enterprise. Yes, that's an official Apple thing. So it's still going through Apple. Same thing with Test Flight. So iOS will not run anything that doesn't have an Apple signature on it.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on that.
So they do have multiple routes by which something can get that signature on it. So one of them is an enterprise. So enterprises have to apply for. There's a program. You have to sign up. There's no way you can't. Obviously, like I'm a developer, so I can, but see, in order to do it, I have to submit it to Apple, and it gets signed, and for me, it would have to go through the App Store. But they did make a thing for enterprises where, I've never used that, so I'm not, but I know that's sort of a separate side thing that doesn't go through the App Store, but it still has an Apple signature on it. So.
Okay. I will say one thing in support of part of Mark's position, and that is that it is an inconvenience to have to go and turn on things in the security control panel, and that is something that I think some developers do really, really well because they spell it out. They even show you photos of what it's supposed, or images, excuse me, of what it's supposed to look like. So you know exactly what you're clicking on and where to go. And others just say, go here and click that. And it's like, okay, hopefully I remember it enough that I can go and do it. So I would love to see somebody standardize just a little more on that for the average person who wants to maybe experiment with some utilities but they're not quite sure about doing some of the security turning on and off, and what am I doing, and am I putting myself in danger? Go through, explain it, picture it, and then go from there. But
hey, Chuck,
there's no doubt that Apple has made it more inconvenient to do a lot of things, and those security things is sort of a different thing. That's not running code. That's what is that code allowed to do? For example, it used to be any code could read off the screen and do a screen capture, or read information out of your contacts. And, now the system doesn't let you do that. So even just because you've gotten code to an app to launch, it still doesn't necessarily have permission to do certain things. So that's a sort of a separate issue than signing. And I think there's no doubt that Apple is, I believe they've walked right up to the edge of what's, where they can go and not make a Mac not a Mac. And, the concern was, for a while, we had a creep of every year they were adding new security restrictions, and, then they added notarization and just keep, and you're just like, are they going to continue this and then make it just like iOS, which they still could do? But it does seem like they've kind of paused that for, they really haven't added any new restrictions for a couple of years. Although, talk about inconvenience, they're now changing the way apps get notarized. So I'm going to have to change my workflow in order to build my app, and because starting I think in November 1st, I think the way I'm doing it now, it won't work anymore. And I'm not even sure I'll be able to do it on the version of macOS I'm running, which isn't that old. So, there's no question they're making things inconvenient. I guess they would say they're protecting us. So, it's sort of this, and they say that about iOS too. Like, well, we're doing this, it's for your benefit, so bad people can't get you. It's a really fine line.
Okay. So I have a question. If anyone on the panel here, can help me, because I'm sure you all have the same experience, which is, I'll use MacVoices Live, as an example, but I have this in, other things, including, a daily subscription. I video subscription. I subscribe to. You get a link. It's a Zoom link. You click on it. It opens Safari. Safari says, you want to open Zoom? Yes, you open Zoom. This is all part of the same protection mechanism. W2F doesn't some lazy SOB at Apple, allow you, do you want to allow this action forever in the future, instead of every time, it's just, it's a mental speed bump. You have to click it and click it.
It's not laziness. They have done this intentionally. Now, I agree with you.
Okay, that's even worse. They're wasting everybody's time.
I agree with you that I don't like that, and I wish they wouldn't have it, but their contention is that this is dangerous, and that it's not safe to do that, and that would I agree. I believe it's the wrong decision, and they should give me that freedom, but it's a policy decision, and I don't believe they'll ever change it.
And I would dare somebody in the audience to come up with a clever exploit faking something that looks like Zoom, because everybody else at this point, they're just habituated. This is this is effing Apple again. I have to click this thing, and they're not even thinking about it. It's like Vista, way back when, you always have to. And then there was this Apple, the Mac versus PC, commercial parodying this of, how brain dead and stupid it is. It asks you over and over and over again, and that just leads you into complacency, for somebody to.
Many people have said exactly what you're saying. Mm-hmm. Many people have said that. And, apparently people from Microsoft migrated over there, or that way of thinking migrated over. I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Oh no, I'm sure Apple invented it on their own. They would never copy something that Microsoft did.
So I've learned something a little bit here, and I'm presuming I've learned something. I always thought that in the case, let's just use Zoom since that we're talking about. But on the other hand, Zoom does it. GoToMeeting does it. That you launch. It has to launch something through. It launches into a browser, and then the browser says, "I want to run the client." I thought that was just the way it had to be. If I'm understanding what you gentlemen are talking about, that's a choice that has to be made because of the way the OS is structured. Or is that the way that some of these, especially the chat apps and our meeting apps and then go to webinar, those are webinar apps or the same kind of collaboration apps.
Well, there's a couple things. One, the first is that they can't assume that you have that, or they don't want to assume that you have the app installed. You may not. They know you have a web browser installed. So that's where they can start. What Mark is talking about is you can build a link. Okay, web links start with HTTP, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the HTTP is actually a protocol. That's the web protocol. But apps can implement any protocol they want. So if you look at a Zoom link, it starts with Zoom : instead of HTTP : right? And it turns out Panorama, you can make Panorama : and you can make a link that starts with that, and it'll launch Panorama. So an app can register with the system and say, I'm defining this protocol. So if you see a URL with that protocol, please launch me and give me the URL because I'm the handler. Mail : is the mail protocol, right? So, you can have different mail apps, but you designate one on your system that it's the favored one that if you click on a mail link, that's where it will go, right? Does that? I'm looking for you to nod, Chuck.
Yeah, I think I'm with you.
Okay, so that's all fine and dandy, and I believe Windows probably has the same thing because it's sort of it's standard with URLs. Now, I don't know if they have the same restriction, but what Apple has decided is that any app that's not from Apple is super dangerous and cannot be declared not dangerous. So if you click on a link that has any links to something that's not an Apple product, it's going to come up with that little alert. So that's where the alert is coming from. Apple is putting up that alert on purpose, saying, hey, this is alarming. You clicked on a link that's not HTTP and it's not mail. It's going to launch this, other application. Which, I think like what you said, Mark, it would be really reasonable for me, to be able to go into settings or somehow say, okay, this is okay. Panorama's okay, or Zoom's okay. But Apple has decided that you're not, smart enough to do that. We've got to warn you that every time. And it really, damages the usability of that feature. There's a lot of things that could be done really cool with that, the fact that it stops every time and it really, so that's sort of, the yin and yang of the security stuff. Well, you want to protect people, but you also don't want to, protect them by, not allowing them to do anything.
Right. And you can offer a way like sort of whole disk access, right? Every time I set up a new Mac, right, the first thing I have to do is, give BBEdit whole disk access, or other tools as well. There should be a one-time setting if you really want to do it. And that's what I'm critical of Apple for. Is
Apple is very reluctant to do that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They've also the sandbox is very restrictive. And when they first came out with the sandbox for macOS about a decade ago, a little more than that, and people thought, oh, okay, this is round one, and they're going to gradually add more granularity and make more things possible by but they never did. So they tend to only ever make more restrictions, and they don't ever be like, yeah, we're going to give you more. It's like a boa constrictor, just tight. So it's kind of unfortunate, and I think that comes from somewhere really high up at Apple. So if it ever does change, it's not going to be until somebody that's quite high up is leaves the company, retires or whatever.
But I feel obligated to defend the logic, because I see people do stupid things with computers all the time, and that's in spite of the fact that there are all these protections in there. And I guarantee you, every one of us knows someone who has their passwords taped to their monitor or screen. Yeah, and so I can't really. I hear what you're saying, Mark, and I agree with you from a convenience standpoint. And for us, it would be fine, but to give the average user to make it easy to turn on whole disk access, and therefore allow a bunch of things to happen that they really don't want to happen. From Apple's standpoint, I can understand why they don't want to. Cletus,
I don't think Mark was saying that. I don't think Mark was saying that he wants whole disk access to be easier. He was saying he wants more options like that. Like he wants an option to say, yes, Zoom is okay. If I click on a Zoom link, please launch it and don't bother me. That's what he wants. And
sure.
They're not offering that.
No, you're right. And I didn't mean, that was probably a bad example on my part, but just, the fact that yes, it's a pain. It doesn't hurt that much, but it is a pain. Cletus in the chat room says, I think Mark may be asking for a macro that selects and answers the query.
Oh, but you can't do that because, Apple, this is built into the system in such a way that kind of thing can't be automated. Because Apple, they actually will, make sure that requires a real click and can't be automated away.
Which, again, Cletus says, I think the majority of people are simply newbies, so Apple protects them. Yeah, I'm with you, Cletus. Mm-hmm. And it protects itself from, bad press and other things. Shoot. Oh, let's see. I wanted to get to a couple more stories because we've been.
Good luck with that.
Well, all right. Well, here's one for you. Counterpoint Intelligence says that the young people listen to Apple Music, the old people watch Apple TV.
So I'm both young and old.
Yeah, this is another. I'm starting to really question Counterpoint with some of these pronouncements because really. I mean, there's some great Apple TV shows that are not in my demographic by a long shot or the demographic of anyone here.
I read that. I clicked on it, and it took me to the Apple World Today story. And Apple World Today had a link to CRP's website. And again, this is another spam bait tactic that unfortunately Dennis, fell for. Basically they're using this to try to promote themselves. And I spoke harshly, I think, of CIRP and their methodology about browsers last time we spoke. And I just observed no one there or even their intern, has contacted me. So I think this is just another, spam baity thing for them to try to get more subscribers.
It does feel like it. Hey, you guys took me off subject, but I wanted to mention when we were having the earlier commentary about iPad and Apple or Mac all coming together. Later this week, I'm going to publish an interview with an individual who was advocating for more convergence, if you will. That person is a member of the panel who's wearing black and a tie. And I give him credit for, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'll tell you right now, you're going to have to go and listen to the show. But he made the first really, really great point about a convergence and why we're thinking about it wrong. And it really slapped me in the face. It slapped me in the face then, but it slapped me even in the face more later. So I'm going to tease it. And of course, I'm talking about Ben Roethig. Because the story goes that we had teased an article that he had written back pre-Dub, And we were going to talk about it after Dub Dub. And then, of course, Dub Dub hit like a ton of bricks. And that's all we could talk about for a few weeks. So I'm going to tell you to look for that, but listen carefully because he's coming at it from a different angle than a lot of us. And he makes some really, really good points. So, Ben, that was
one parter. Is this one part? Is this one part, two part?
This is a one-parter. This is a one-parter. And it's, but Ben really makes some great points that have me re-looking at my opinions and my approaches to things. So good job, Ben. Good job.
Thanks, Chuck.
Ben.
Okay.
So someone here has to be professional. Might as well be Ben.
Yeah.
Yes.
Somebody has to do it.
Professional and just slapping around everybody.
Why does somebody have to be professional? That assumes facts, not evidence.
Okay, that's fair. Ben, you're being an overachiever.
Yes.
Just keep it up, Ben. Keep it up. In the third part of this MacVoices Live session, the panel takes a look at the reported death of Evernote and a decline in the use of threads already. That's next time on MacVoices. I'll see you then. As always, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.